All right, do you want to do the introductions, Megan? And we'll get started shortly. Megan Grimes from the Nebraska Ethanol Board is going to introduce our instructors. And our second instructor, Jerry Jones, is going to hopefully sign in the next minute or two.
Hey, I'm Megan Grimes with the Nebraska Ethanol Board, and I just wanted to thank Hunter, who's our technical advisor for the board and also teaches here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, for getting this set up. We're doing this training with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and as well as the university, and the board is really happy to put on these educational and safety seminars. We do two major ones each year, our forum in April and also the Environmental Health and Safety Summit in October. And we've started doing more of these trainings with the help of Hunter. Right now, with this training, the Nebraska Ethanol Board is doing a tuition reimbursement for Nebraska ethanol plants. And we're doing it for the first 20 registrants, and we only have 4 of those spots left. So if you enjoy what you see today, make sure you register quickly if you're a Nebraska ethanol producer, because we only have 4 reimbursement spots available. So your employee who attends could receive up to $500 back after taking this course. So let me tell you a little bit about our instructors. We have Don Abramson. He's a senior process safety specialist, and he has over 40 years of experience in operations and engineering roles to draw from process safety management, operations management, process safety engineering, technical management, quality assurance management, process development, and research. He recently retired from Celanese as the Global Process Safety Manager. And he also worked for Occidental Chemical for more than 32 years. We also have Jerry Jones, who's a staff consultant with the American Institute of Chemical Engineers with the Center for Chemical Process Safety, and he has 40 years of experience across multiple industry sectors, including chemicals, polymers, pharmaceuticals for Monsanto, SRI International, Raychem, and Genotech. I'll let Hunter take it from here.
Jerry, go ahead and enable your microphone on the top of your screen, and we'll get the presentation started.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Anytime you're ready.
Okay.
Get the slides.
Yeah, okay, great. First, Hunter, how many people do we have on? Did you get a head count?
Yeah, we currently have 7 participants.
Okay, I see on the left. Okay. Don and I are going to be giving or facilitating this course, and we wanted to just briefly go over some of the reasons for risk-based process safety and some of the lessons learned and why a risk-based approach is being taken. So, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to briefly talk about lessons learned, some of the process safety management system deficiencies that have been associated with many accidents, the movement that many organizations have undertaken over the last couple decades to move to more of a risk-based approach for managing their operations, not just process safety, but quality, environmental protection, occupational safety, manufacturing operations in terms of on-stream time. Talk about how organizations typically go through this change in the way they operate, and we'll give you some of an overview of the guidelines for risk-based process safety that we're going to be talking about at the July course. Next slide. Over the last 50+ years, there have been a lot of different incidents that have happened in terms of process safety, and the things that they did not have in common is they happened at organizations of all sizes, small companies to very large multinational process companies, and they happen across many different industry sectors, not just one. You hear about a lot of incidents that happen in petroleum and natural gas production, processing, refining applications, petrochemicals, but they also happen in inorganic chemicals manufacturing and fertilizers, mineral processing, specialty chemicals, pulp and paper, agricultural commodity processing, including for the production of biodiesel, bioethanol, in pharmaceuticals, and in electric utilities and water and wastewater utilities. And they happen in organizations with all types of technical levels of discipline and disciplines represented, from those that have very few technical experts on site to those that have a wide range of engineering and technical disciplines represented. Next slide. Some of the lessons learned in terms of the things that were in common at many of these sites where these incidents happened is that in most cases, the hazards that led to the event were well understood by someone in the industry. They were often described in public domain available literature. Many of the organizations thought they had good management practices in terms of how they were managing risk, and in fact, there were a lot of deficiencies. And the two things that they almost always had in common were they were all preventable and there were always warning signs. Next slide. So in terms of the deficiencies, let's go on now to the next slide, Hunter. So what was done because of these deficiencies? In 2005, AICHE and the Center for Chemical Process Safety, member companies in CCPS, which was founded in '85, decided that we're still having a lot of incidents, even though we've had in place for decades process safety management systems in place in Europe, and since the early '90s in the U.S., we're still seeing incidents. Why is that? So many organizations within CCPS joined an effort to put out guidelines based on a risk-based approach. What's in that book, I personally was involved with in 1991 in rolling out across 13 countries in 18 different facilities, almost exactly what's in that book. And it works, and this isn't theory. Next slide. So these key issues that have been identified time and time again are listed here on the left. Human errors, 80% of the incident reports, that's what's listed as one of the initiating causes. But the causes for human error are much deeper than just a lapse of memory or a slip in terms of being distracted and skipping a step or whatever. It goes much deeper into these other issues that are listed below. And complacency, which is a culture issue, not fully understanding the risk, which gets into the same as for design deficiencies, actual capabilities, competencies of individuals involved, inadequacies in the procedures as written, not following procedures, which gets into issues around culture and lack of operating discipline, normalization of deviance, which we'll talk about a lot in the course, deficiencies in management of change, and inadequacies in the did I go mute again?
No, we can hear you, Jerry.
Okay. I had to hit my screen on blank. I was worried that it happened again. Inadequate maintenance and insufficient emergency preparedness. So what AICHE did in this guidelines book is propose making changes to in terms of how people implement the basic 14 elements of OSHA PSM or comparable elements in Europe based on risk, and adding the other elements I've shown on the right. There's 6 elements. The culture is addressed, process safety competency, stakeholder outreach, conduct of operations, which is more than operating discipline. It's planning the work, defining the work, as well as than operating with a high level of discipline. And this is often called operational excellence in many companies in manufacturing operations instead of conduct of operations. Implementing specific measures and metrics and management review. Next slide. And so, next slide. In terms of what many companies are doing, this risk-based approach is right in line with what's been going on for about 20 years in many organizations. It's been described in various international standards, ISO 31000, which is an overall enterprise risk management approach. What we're going to talk about is exactly in line with that. It's in line with what's going to come out in occupational safety. It was supposed to come out in 2016. This ISO 45001 is going to get published in 2017, which is a risk-based approach for occupational safety. The ISO 14001, its most recent edition, now includes a risk-based approach. ISO 9000 does as well. And in the food industry and ag commodity processing as it relates to food safety, 22000 also is taking a risk-based approach, and FDA has been pushing that. Next slide. So the typical steps most organizations go through are shown on this next slide. Next slide, Hunter. And most organizations have now moved to at least a compliance-based management system approach. And why is that not adequate? Well, in many cases, regulations don't address all of the hazards in the workplace. They certainly don't in the chemical industry and chemical process companies. They don't address many of the hazards that are present in utility systems, for example. So a more proactive approach is moving to step 3, where some functions within an organization use a risk-based approach. It may be quality only, maybe process safety, whatever. As organizations get more sophisticated, they try to integrate these risk management processes across all their functions and have a single management system structure. That's certainly what we did back in the companies I worked for back in the early 90s. And then if you're right at the top tier in industry now, you've got these operational excellence programs that focus on a risk-based approach with continual improvement, the right metrics being practiced. And we're going to talk about these level 4 and level 5 practices as part of this risk-based approach to process safety. Next slide. And by the way, I always ask companies, where are you in that continuum right now in your organization? Are you at level 3, 4, or 5? And starting back several decades, one of the things I always like to have people discuss within their plant sites, within their production operations, how do you define safety? And the definition we wanted to use was safety is the management of risk to a tolerable level. Next slide. And that risk management needs to be a core competency within the organization. It needs to be embedded in the management system processes. And again, we'll talk about that in the course. Next slide. Now, in terms of the overview of this course, next slide, Hunter. We're going to go through, during the 4 days, we're going to march through after giving an introduction to some basic risk concepts and making certain everyone's on the same page the first morning. Then we're in the afternoon of the first day. We're going to launch into commit to process safety and walk through those first 5 elements. In the second day, we're going to go and start discussing process knowledge management, hazard identification, risk analysis, and we're going to spend about a day and a half on that. And then we're going to move into managing this, the specific things that are done on a day-to-day basis, starting with operating procedures through emergency management planning and drills and so forth. And then finish up on the last afternoon with learning from experience and talking about incident investigation and the whole learning from events process, not just the investigation, metrics, auditing, and management review. And the next slide, Hunter. Then we'll talk also about, while we're going through some of those elements, some of the specific guidance that's offered by CCPS, like the catastrophic incident warning signs. And next slide, Hunter. Get into a discussion of what are some of the warning signs you should be looking for. And next slide. And many of these warning signs are not the ones that are very obvious, which you're going to be looking for when you do inspections, things like housekeeping issues, issues with how maintenance was done on a flange fitting, for example, missing bolts, leaking flange fitting, obvious areas where you've got problems because of noisy bearings. Those are things that are the physical warnings that are easy to see. We're going to talk about those that are below the surface, some of the management system deficiencies, and we'll be talking about those as we go through the 20 elements. Next slide. And these are some of the areas where warning signs are presented, for example, in this book on catastrophic incident warning signs in the area of culture, process safety knowledge management procedures, asset integrity and reliability, training and competency, and learning from experience. Next slide, Tony. Next slide. These are just some of the examples of things we'll talk about when we talk about process safety, culture, and leadership. Things like overdue process safety action items, slow management response to process safety concerns, lack of sense of vulnerability, people get complacent. Next slide. Not consulting and listening to technical experts, bullying by colleagues in terms of not listening to their concerns, and then examples of things that are indicators of normalization of deviance or drift, operating outside safe operating limits, varying shift operating procedures. We'll talk about some of those when we get normalization of deviance related to asset integrity and maintenance and so forth as well. Next slide. Now, in terms of normalization of deviance and lack and complacency, we'll talk about dust explosions as one example. There were over 500 of them during a 25 to 30 year period in the last 25 years of the last century and up through 2010 in the U.S. And we have known since the early 1920s, when the first NFPA standard went into place, what needed to be done. Yet we were still seeing all of these incidents happening. And we'll talk about that. Next slide. One example is the largest grain elevator in the world. They certainly knew what was in those standards, yet there was a major action in 1998. And on the next slide, what was shown is in the investigation report. Next slide, Hunter. OSHA's investigation found that lack of conformance with recognized standards, learning to accept poor housekeeping conditions, lack of maintenance, things that they knew better but still happen. So we'll talk about why do those kinds of things occur. Next slide. We'll get into discussions of of anatomy of an incident. We discussed the first day, where do we put barriers in place to stop a hazard that gets out of control because some initiating cause going all the way over to a loss of containment event and a major impact. And we'll talk about preventive safeguards or barriers before the loss of containment, and then after loss of containment, mitigating barriers. Next slide. In terms of looking at some of these warning signs, those warning signs are the holes in the barriers, these preventive and mitigative barriers. And we'll talk about this again on day one and then throughout the course. What are these barriers? Why are these barriers vulnerable? What are some of the reasons for vulnerability, etc.? Next slide. We'll talk about different tools that people have used to help people communicate the hazards and risks and the barriers that are in place. We'll talk about bow tie diagrams, for example. And the next slide, Hunter. In the course, and this going, I've already talked about that, Hunter. So the course structure, as I mentioned, I've already talked about anatomy of an incident. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about loss of containment causes. We're going to talk about the different measures. We're going to go through all these 20 elements. And we're going to talk about several dozen case study examples and describe what happened, including consequences, how it happened, and then why it happened, getting to the root causes, which are issues with management systems. The next slide, Hunter. And we'll finish up the last day and talk about the Vision 2020 strategy, some of the tools that are available to implement risk-based process safety related to culture, management systems, enhanced applications of learning from events, lessons learned, discipline adherence to standards, and intentional competency development. And so with that, I want to very quickly just give you an overview of risk-based process safety and what we're going to be talking about and open it up to questions. And before that, Don, did I miss anything that I should have said?
No, Jerry, I don't think you missed anything. There's a couple of things I'd like to kind of emphasize. This 4 days, it's a lot of material that we're going to cover, but it's intended to be a dialogue, not a monologue. You're not going to be sitting there listening to Jerry and I talk for 4 days. Our goal is to get as much engagement as we can through the breakout exercise, the workshop exercise that we have, trying to get this to focus on the concerns, the issues, where you're going with process safety, and how all of this comes together. So I think you're going to find it's a very dynamic, interactive process. And looking forward to lots of engagement, lots of challenging of things that we're saying, and the direction we're trying to explain how risk-based process safety goes. I just wanted to add that, Jerry.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you did, Don, because that's very important. Those many case studies are there to generate discussion, and that's really the big advantage of a course like this, is getting a group of several dozen people in the room and talking about risk exposures and how to best manage them. And we just use these case studies to show where people failed in the past, and hopefully you're not going to make those same mistakes in the future.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Before we take questions, you can type your questions in on the bottom right-hand side of the screen on the chat. But before we do that, I'm going to have Matt Jorgensen from Nebraska Manufacturing Extension Partnership just give you a brief summary of how you would register for this course, and also his contact information is there. So Matt, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, Hunter, thank you. Just real quickly for everyone in the audience here, again, the Process Safety Bootcamp for this year. You see the registration link right there before you in the slide. You can type that link in directly or go to the MEP's website, nemep.unl.edu, go to the workshops and events drop down, and there'll be a link to the Process Safety Bootcamp there. So again, type that in directly as you see it there in the slide, or just go ahead and visit our website. If you need help at all while registering or have questions about the Process Safety Bootcamp or the Nebraska MEP and our role in it, go ahead and get in touch with me. Again, my name is Matthew Jorgensen. My email address is right there, mjorgensen@unl.edu. And also feel free to call or text at 308-293-5884. That is my phone number. And again, I just want to emphasize, as you register, if you'd like to register, we have some fields for you to fill in that indicates your ACHI membership status if you'd like to become a member and take advantage of a discount membership part of that. And then also Megan of the Nebraska Ethanol Board, she did mention that $500 tuition reimbursement. Again, there are about 4 slots of those left for in-state alcohol plants. So again, thanks, Hunter, and that's my contact info, and our guests are free to use it.
Yeah, and just to recap, the course is July 11th through the 14th, and it is in Kearney at the UNK campus. And again, the registration link is there if you're interested. And I believe we do have one question typed here in the chat.
Okay, I see that.
And so the question I'll reread. If possible, please see what you can find out about the Didion milling and ethanol explosion incidents so that it can be discussed during the case studies. That incident is among the most recent ethanol-related safety examples. So Don and Jerry, are you familiar with that incident? And if so,
I am not.
I'm not either. But we'll be pleased to look into that incident and identify where lessons learned are applicable to the 20 risk-based elements. So, great suggestion.
Yeah. Todd, do you know what the date was? This week. Okay.
And so we'll go ahead and get that story to both Jerry and Don so they can look into that incident as well.
Perfect.
We have one more question coming in from Mike. He said it occurred last Wednesday evening, but apparently the article about it was just recently published. So we'll make sure to look into that and include a discussion about that at the boot camp.
Yeah, we would be glad to do that. We may not have a lot of good information on any type of root cause analysis if it's this recent, but it certainly is a good topic of discussion.
And I want to add that we're going to have about 3 dozen case studies, and I've got a couple of specific examples of incidents that have happened in ethanol facilities, but we try to present incidents that happen across many industry sectors as examples, and the fact that they happen in one sector, we see the same root causes that are contributing to these incidents across many sectors. And so definitely we'll talk about ethanol. We're going to talk about a lot of other industry sector incidents that are very applicable to ethanol operations, though.
All right, if there's no more questions, I would like to thank Megan from the Ethanol Board for being here, as well as for Jerry Jones and Don Abramson, who are instructors for the course, and then Matthew Jorgensen there in Kearney. Thanks for helping host this webinar. And we'll also be sending out the recording of the webinar for those who couldn't be here today.